Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for The Amazing Race 35 following episode 3, and I thought this was a pretty fun episode as well. Now, I will admit it's a bit disappointing to learn that this is merely the first part of a mega leg because we have to really uphold the no non-elimination leg rule. But here we are, and we actually got a pretty interesting result here, both in terms of the placements, but also in terms of like the elements of the race that we've seen so far. But we'll get more to that in a moment. But there are 11 teams to look at, and as I'm waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 11, we obviously don't have a boot to get into here. However, this is the team that I feel the least confident about in terms of winning the race, and here we have Liam and Jeremy. And I've been pretty low on them during a lot of the season. Obviously, they've been towards the back of the pack for a lot of the race, but also have been getting relatively limited screen time here. Now, they did get a bit of a spike here. They got to talk a bit more about their relationship. And we even got that bit at the end about them like wanting to come back. But that doesn't change the fact that they are in last place. And obviously, while they weren't necessarily in the back for most of the part of the episode, they obviously ended up in last place by the end of it. And it wouldn't surprise me based on their content here if this is the end for them. Like, they really tried to make an effort, but they just come up short by the end. And I feel like they're probably in a bad spot, both from an edit and a race standpoint, which is why they're here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have a team that's actually not in a bad spot right now in the race. However, I still feel like they've gotten very little screen time over the course of the episode, and here we have Robin and Chelsea. Now, Robin and Chelsea had a surprisingly strong episode here, where they started off obviously in last place, and they obviously got off to a bad start, but they were able to make up some ground, like during the boat task. But really, it's the detour and getting to the pit stop where they really made up ground, where they went from ninth place at the start of the detour to fifth place by the end of it, which is pretty impressive if you ask me. But at the same time, I feel like considering like this path for them, they got very little screen time compared to the other teams. And at this point, I feel like it's pretty unlikely that they'll win the race if you ask me, which is why they're here at number 10. Now moving on to number 9, and we're going back towards the back of the pack here. And here we have Andrea and Milena, who are obviously in a pretty bad spot as well. Now, they did actually make up some ground during the detour, where they went from 11th place at the start of the detour to 7th place by the time that they finished it. However, they really fell behind on the way to the pit stop, where both Joe and Ian and Greg and John ended up passing them, to where they dropped 9 spots by the pit stop to 9th place. And I feel like they didn't really do much to change my view of them as racers. I feel like they're still probably one of the more mediocre teams from a performance standpoint. And I just feel like it's probably not that likely that they're going to win, which is why they're here at number 9. Now moving on to number 8, and we have another team that has continued to slide in my estimation, but here we have Morgan and Lena. And obviously the big talk from this episode is the fact that they chose to use their express pass here to skip the boat task. However, I feel like they didn't really take advantage of it, where they were technically the first team to finish. However, they did it relatively late in the task after they had already started it, to the point where by the time they eventually get to the start of the detour, we see that Joel and Garrett have managed to pass them, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. And obviously they struggled quite a bit during the detour there. I feel like they didn't exactly pick the right detour. It seemed like that plastic one was a bit more difficult than the paper one. That caused them to fall to 5th place. And obviously they dropped further to 6th place by the time they reached the pit stop. So I feel like with that, they really misused this express pass here. And I feel like considering that was a big part of their edit in this episode, I feel like it's probably not a great look for them. And again, at this point, I feel like they're a team that is going to be high variance at best. I feel like they're a team that could get into good spots occasionally, but I feel like they're also prone to pretty big falls as we saw here, which is why they're here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we have a team that I don't think I've really changed my view on them. However, they got really lucky during this episode, and here we have Joel and Garrett. And obviously they have a really weird leg here, where they did start off in the back of the pack in 9th place. However, after getting to the travel agency, they get really lucky with getting onto an earlier flight than they would have otherwise, more in line with what the first teams got when they got to the travel agency. And it got even better when the earlier teens flight, they ended up getting delayed to 3 o'clock, which caused them to be on the first flight instead alongside Joe and Ian, which is really insane there. They're really able to leapfrog the rest of the group. And obviously they're able to get onto one of the first few boats in the morning. Now, yes, it is a bit of an equalizer at first. However, once we saw like the pile up that a lot of the teams faced during that task, it really became advantageous for them to get into that spot. And they were even able to be the first team to reach Detour, even passing Morgan and Lena after using their Express Pass. Now, yes, they do ultimately fall to second place by the end of it, but really it's the fact that they got this early flight that really benefits them a lot on this leg here. No, at the end of the day, I don't think they really did much to improve my view of them as racers. I still feel like they're probably going to be middle of the road. However, they just got a really lucky break, and that caused them to be in a great spot. So I feel like for all those reasons, I can't have them too much higher than here, though I do have to acknowledge just how crazy their leg was here. And because of that, they're here at number 7. And moving on to number 6, and we have a team that I literally just mentioned, and here we have Joe and Ian. And again, it's a very similar story with Joe and Ian. They were technically supposed to be on a later flight initially, but they got very lucky at the travel agency with getting an earlier flight, and obviously with the earlier team's flight getting delayed, they're able to get to the front of the pack alongside Joel and Garrett. Now they do kind of fall off from there where they kind of struggle a bit on that boat detour, falling to 6th place, and they choose the wrong detour in my eyes, causing them to fall a bit further to 8th place, but they are able to catch up a little bit, getting to 7th place by the end of the episode. So obviously, it's another situation that proves to me that they're probably not the best racers in the world, where they literally had a very strong position due to luck, but they weren't able to fully utilize it after like the getting off of the plane and stuff. So I feel like for that reason, I can't have them too much higher based purely off their race ability. But I feel like compared to Joel and Garrett, I feel like they're being propped up a bit more in the edit. I feel like they're probably a bit more likely to be major characters. And with that, I can see more of an underdog run happening for them. But at the end of the day, I still don't think they're the best racers in the world, and because of that, they're here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we're moving back to one of these teams that had a more mediocre leg, and here we have Greg and John. And obviously, Greg and John had a very rough leg there. They started off in 3rd place. However, due to them like catching the later flight, due to it getting delayed, and obviously with them struggling a lot on the boat task, they end up falling all the way to 10th place by the start of the detour. Now they are able to catch up a bit, like getting up to 9th place by the end of the detour and 8th place by the time they reach the pit stop. However, I still feel like they're probably not the best racers in the world. I feel like this was a pretty rough look for them. And plus, I feel like with their edit, I just don't feel like they're being propped up as much as other teams, which is why I do have them here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and we have probably the biggest fall from grace from one week to the next. And here we have Jocelyn and Victor, who obviously have a very terrible leg here where they start off in 1st place. However, they are able to fall quite a bit where they end up falling to 4th place due to them getting to the dock a bit later, but they really struggle further during the boat detour that resulted in them falling to 8th place. But then they really struggle even more once they get to the detour, struggling a lot on the paper task that caused them to fall to 2nd to last. And while I didn't think they were going to fall behind Liam and Jeremy, I feel like this was a very bad look for them. Obviously, a very high variance display here, where they went from being in the top of the pack to pretty much at the bottom. And I feel like a lot of it was due to like their struggling at the individual tasks. Now, I still feel like at the end of the day, they're probably going to be one of the bigger characters on the season, and I could see a world where they catch up. But I feel like this episode like really highlighted that they're going to be high variance players, that they may not always do the best in any given situation. And I feel like the top teams we'll be talking about are a bit more likely to win, both in terms of their edit, but also in terms of their consistency as racers, which is why I do have them here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have another team that has kind of surprised me to a degree. However, they did manage to do pretty well here. And here we have Steve and Anna Lee. And they're a very weird team as well, where they did actually catch the later flight, obviously being about 6 hours behind the other teams. However, once they get to the dock, they're able to somehow snag like the first boat, which is really crazy to think about. Like, I don't know how the teams in front of them didn't catch it, but through that, they're able to really catch up, jumping to 3rd place during that task. They're able to, again, like do pretty well in the detour that allows them to jump all the way to 1st place. And they do technically end up winning this leg, although it's not technically going to be a win according to your statistics. They're going to have to like do well in the second half if they wanted to officially count for the record. But I feel like on the whole, this was a very strong leg for them. Even though they did get kind of lucky at points, I feel like they're kind of starting to warm up to me. I feel like they're starting to be potential contenders for me, which is why I had them this high on the list. But I still feel like the top two teams are going to be a bit more interesting to watch, if you ask me, which is why I do have them here at number three. Now moving on to number two, and we have another team that has kind of started to rub up on me, and that has led to them jumping a bit higher in the list. And here we have Todd and Ashley. Now, yes, they're probably not the best racers on this season. However, they're pretty good, and I feel like through these first couple legs, they've been somewhat consistent, where they managed to run away with a fourth place finish here by the end of the leg. Now, yes, they kind of got unlucky early on with their late flight and them not being on the first boat, but I feel like they did well enough during the tasks to where I still feel confident about them as racers. And plus, I feel like they've gotten a decent amount of content during these first three episodes as well, to where I could see them being pretty rootable figures as well, which is why I had them here at number two. And now, at number one, the team that I believe is the most likely to win the Amazing Race 35 at this point is Rob and Corey. And I feel like I feel a bit better about them at this point, where I did say over these last couple weeks that I felt like Rob and Corey are probably the better built team compared to Jocelyn and Victor. They're probably the team that I feel more confident being consistent. And I think this episode really highlighted this, where we saw Jocelyn and Victor really struggle, obviously, over the course of this leg, while Rob and Corey have remained strong. I mean, obviously, they were able to get on to the second flight overall, and they were able to even pass Jocelyn and Victor in getting like the onto the first boat on the dock. And they're able to do pretty well during the course of the rest of the tasks, where they're able to run away with a third place finish here. So I feel like they've been shown to be a pretty consistent team, and I feel like they'll probably continue to be consistent over the course of the race, which is why I do have them here at number one. And there we go, that will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out with the channel. Now I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so you can stay tuned for that. I'm still covering Survivor 45 as well as Big Brother 25, so you can expect weekly Power Rankings of those shows. I am now on Patreon, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And if you haven't already, you can also join my Discord server by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that is a video. See ya.